If you sacrifice what you're in effect telling to yourself is your deepest values, your happiness, your judgment are not that important. They're not as important as this other consideration for which you're sacrificing. And in the end, you can't enjoy life to the fullest in that way.
Sacrifice is incompatible with success. And it's something you have to actively guard against if you're passionately committed to your success. It's a new year, and many are making resolutions for the sake of self-improvement. Should more sacrifice be one of your resolutions? Does success in life require sacrifice? Many famously successful people say that it does. And in saying that, they're encouraged by our culture's intellectual leaders who say sacrifice is noble. But what is sacrifice really? And are those who recommend it in connection with success thinking clearly about what it means? Do those who regard sacrifice as noble really want us to succeed? Well, today we're going to discuss the concept of sacrifice, whether it's necessary for success, how it's used in our culture, and how Ayn Rand used the concept quite differently from others in order to reject it. Welcome to the Ayn Rand Institute podcast. My name is Ben Baer. With me is postdoctoral fellow at ARI, Tristan de Liège. So, Tristan, why do some people think that success requires sacrifice?
Hey, Ben. Good to have you. And yeah, it's very common to have this kind of perspective. As you said, many famously successful people, certainly most successful athletes frame things in this way, successful entrepreneurs, successful musicians and artists. Most people think that success requires sacrifice because what they frame it as is that success requires a lot of discipline. It requires giving up enormous things. It requires setting aside time that you would have rather spent, perhaps, or would have been easier to spend doing other things like enjoying yourself with friends or partying or relaxing or traveling or having fun. And ambitious careers, being successful in any field requires discipline. It requires spending a lot of time learning certain skills. It requires investment. It requires putting off a lot of rewards. One of the most prominent examples of this recently that I've encountered, and I think it's very common and very paradigmatic of a way to frame it, is how LeBron James has portrayed his own career. So recently in an interview, he talked about how he sacrificed his loved ones for his career. And it's very typical of how successful individuals frame their success that, okay, I have to sacrifice time with my loved ones. I have to sacrifice times with my friends. I have to sacrifice relationships. Obviously, the way he put it in that specific moment was intended to be playful, but he was making a serious point that he had to give up a lot of time with his family in order to pursue his career as a successful NBA player. And obviously, he's probably arguably the most successful basketball player of all time. Other examples in which this comes up would be starting a dream business. Like if you want to start, you have a vision for a startup or a vision for a product you want to create, people will often say, you need to make all sorts of sacrifices to do that. You need to be prepared to make no money at first. You need to be prepared to give up a ton of your time, work very long hours, lose sleep. Another very prominent cultural example is how people think about careers requiring ambitious levels of training and education. So, for example, medical school, where a lot of people conceptualize it as you're not going to make it through medical school unless you're prepared to sacrifice your time, sacrifice time with friends, sacrifice opportunities to party or have fun or, enjoy your youth, essentially. A lot of people frame it in that way. You have to give up your 20s to, really succeed because you have to spend all your time studying. You have to study late at night. You have to be very disciplined. And a last prominent example is the parenting. where people frame it as, look, to be a good parent, you have to be prepared to sacrifice money, time, energy, even sleep. Obviously there's a kind of cultural expectation that what being a parent is it's going to be painful and hard and difficult, and you're going to have to give up a lot of time that you could have spent doing other things, other more enjoyable things. And so people conceptualize that again as a sacrifice. And to answer the question that you just asked, why do people think that success really requires sacrifice? Well, these kinds of examples are very salient to people. People think about these kinds of examples and they think, yeah, like if your choice is if you want to be ambitious and successful, you have to sacrifice. The other option is you don't sacrifice, but then you're complacent. You can be comfortable. You don't try anything very difficult. You're lazy. And so success does require sacrifice from that perspective.
Yeah, I think you're right. Those are salient examples. And I mean, they would be convincing of the idea that success requires sacrifice. If those are really cases of sacrifice. And so we have to think clearly about, well, what really is sacrifice? And I think the first sign of conceptual confusion here is when you ask, well, if those are cases of sacrifice, what isn't? And unless somebody thinks that everything we do is sacrifice, there's got to be some cases of things that aren't. How about the example of a banker who makes millions of dollars on some clever investment? Is that a sacrifice? Well, if anything's not a sacrifice, I would think that would be it. That's a case where there's this enormous profit that just comes rolling in because of some clever investment, some clever trade that he makes with. But of course, then you have to think, well, look, yes, that's by most people's account not a sacrifice. Why? Because it's a case of profit. But then you have to remember that profit costs something. It always does. A banker's trade still involves an investment, still involves giving up money, still involves giving up, risking that the investment capital might get lost. And I mean, I guess you could say at this point, well, yeah, even that's a sacrifice. But then almost everything that anybody does is a sacrifice, and the term becomes meaningless. I mean, even a lottery winner still has to give up that dollar that the lottery costs. Anything we do involves expending some energy. So unless everything is a sacrifice, which would be meaningless, then, well, that's clearly not. These cases of investment, clearly not. But then it's important that the fact that you're paying something up front, the fact that there's a cost, the fact that you have to sink something in order to get something in return, the mere fact of paying a price does not make something a sacrifice. And then you have to remember, well, investment takes many forms other than money, and profit takes many forms aside from monetary return. And so with that big question in mind, and keeping in mind the proviso, just because you're paying a price doesn't make it a sacrifice, how would you then think about the LeBron James case, Tristan?
Yeah, so in thinking about LeBron specifically, I want to pick up on two things you just mentioned, Ben. The first point about that there's a conceptual confusion here in the sense that everything requires a cost, right? Every career requires a cost. Every goal that you have requires some kind of cost or payment in terms of time, energy, money, and so on. And certainly with LeBron, a really ambitious career like being an NBA player requires enormous cost. It requires a lot of time and discipline spent training, learning, practicing. And that does mean that he's going to have to give up time doing other things that he could have done. So including time with his family, time with his friends, and so on. But that's true about any career. So as far as that goes, we still don't have a sense of like why that has to be called a sacrifice. The other point that you made that I think is really interesting is the idea that profit takes many forms. Now, what's really interesting about LeBron and why he's such a striking example is that he is, in fact, extremely well paid for what he's doing. So, even if we're just looking at in financial terms, he's profiting a lot from his investment of time. He's one of the most well paid athletes ever. And from a spiritual or emotional perspective, he loves what he's doing. So it's not like there's no profit in the other sense of enjoyment or love for what he's actually doing, or you might call it a spiritual reward. He loves playing basketball. He loves thinking about it. You know, it has podcasts where he talks about it and how much he loves the game and how much it means to him. So what does he actually mean here? Well, I think what he means is not that there's some kind of net loss, right? Because clearly there isn't. He's financially benefiting and he's happy doing what he's doing. He doesn't have regrets. But I think what he actually means when he says that, when he says, oh, I have to sacrifice time with my family, is that there's a huge value cost, that it's a big cost to pay to have that kind of discipline and that kind of dedication.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in other words, the point to make about someone like LeBron is that he's not that different from my example of the banker. He's somebody who maybe makes a big upfront investment, but still, because he reaps such rewards from it, there's no reason to think of it as a sacrifice. It's an investment. And you can think of many of the other examples of things that people say are success that requires sacrifice. So like it's easiest to see in the case of somebody who's starting a business for the first time. That seems like sacrifice because there's such a big risk. But the point of going into business, the point of opening a new business is to succeed, is to profit in just the same way that LeBron James did. And even if somebody doesn't succeed, the failure is not what they were going for. They were trying to become rich and successful in opening a business. And that's leaving aside the fact that people also enjoy the work itself, which is why do they go into business in one field but not in another? You also mentioned earlier the example of somebody going to med school. Now, I think that's a similar kind of investment. And depending on the field of medicine you go into, you may or may not make a lot of money from it. Certainly many doctors do make a lot of money. But even for those who don't, right, this is where the point that profit takes many forms is important. That even if the doctor is not making enough to make them wealthy, just like the person who picks one business rather than another, there's something about the work that they really enjoy. And just in the same way that LeBron James enjoys playing basketball, there's something about the kind of knowledge that they're going to acquire as a doctor, something about working with patients, something about the subject matter that gives them joy. Just like many teachers enjoy imparting knowledge and seeing their students learn and grow, doctors enjoy seeing their patients get better. And something similar is involved in the parenting example. Obviously, that involves an enormous investment up front and a lot of trade-offs that you have to make, things that you can't do now because you're occupied raising your children. And here, part of the reason why it really might seem like a sacrifice to some people is obviously the payoff is entirely non-monetary. You're not going to profit at all monetarily from your child. The profit is not monetary that any good parents are going for. They enjoy raising a child. There's a great form of happiness that comes from doing that well. There's all kinds of people who would say that their life was substantially improved by it, that they would not have wanted to not have the child be a part of their life. And so there's many forms of profit, both monetary and non-monetary, that once you take them into consideration, you realize that the investment that you're paying up front is worth the return in happiness that you get from it. And I mean, one thing I do want to stress here, Tristan, to be very clear, is that the point here is definitely not that everything that everybody does is motivated by gain in the end just because it's motivated by something. We're certainly not saying here there's no such thing as sacrifice at all. For many of those examples, somebody going to med school, raising children, if they have the wrong motivations, it sure could be a sacrifice. But my point is it doesn't need to be. There can be a motivation by expected return in the end that makes it not a sacrifice. And we should probably talk about more examples like that.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. But let's look at a couple of examples, I think, that kind of clarify this. One example, in again thinking about the field of work and success in career, is when people sacrifice a career choice for the sake of their parents. And we've all heard about cases like this, especially a common form is people who want to be an artist or choose a kind of career that is seen as more risky or less socially respectable in certain circles. So an artistic career perhaps is something that you really want, but your parents or your community expects you or demands that you choose a career in a STEM field, or that you pursue the career of your parents, maybe to work in the family business. And this may be for various reasons. It may be about respect or honor, or it may be about financial stability. But regardless of the reason of it, that is a real sacrifice that people make. It's if you are really passionate about a field, a certain career, and you choose something else for the sake of the approval of your parents, that is a genuine sacrifice. It's a net loss, to put it in the terms that we just put before. And there are other kinds of examples of this that I think people would less frequently regard as a sacrifice, but are genuine sacrifices that happen. One kind of example is people who sacrifice personal enjoyment in their work because they're trying to maintain a certain kind of status. So if what you're motivated by is competition, or that, oh, I need the approval of friends or a certain kind of social community. So maybe not your parents now, but you need to keep up appearances or make a certain amount of money to be in certain standing with certain individuals. And that's what's motivating you. And you're choosing a kind of work that enables you to do that instead of working in another field that would be personally more meaningful to you. So maybe, for example, you would be personally more interested in being an academic and doing academic research, but you are afraid that you wouldn't make enough money to stay with your friends from college, so you pursue a career as a lawyer instead. I personally know people who have chosen careers like that precisely because they want to maintain a certain kind of status, and that's a kind of sacrifice too. It's a net loss to give up on, again, personal fulfillment, personal enjoyment in the kind of work that you could be doing just for the sake of maintaining a certain kind of status in the eyes of others.
Yeah.
And just one more thing I just want to say about these is it's important to notice how different these are from the LeBron James case and the medical school and entrepreneur case. In the kinds of cases we started out with, where people are calling them sacrifices, there's a fundamental difference in how those people are experiencing their lives. LeBron James has no regrets about what he's doing. He pays enormous costs, but he benefits enormously. He has deep fulfillment. He loves what he's doing. He knows why he's doing what he's doing. He's at peace with it. All of his goals make sense and are integrated together. And he's not, and this is a key point too that we'll return back later, he's not prioritizing the judgment of others over his own independent judgment about what's good for him. And same thing in the as we described them in the medical school case and the you're starting your own business case. you're relying on your own judgment. You're choosing what's meaningful and fulfilling to you, and you're pursuing your chosen purpose as your highest value. And that's what makes those fundamentally different than these kinds of cases.
I think one takeaway of your analysis there is that it might be true that sacrifice is necessary for success in the eyes of other people. But I think I take it part of what you're saying is that that's not real success, or at least that's not the kind of success that's worth wanting. If what you do to get it, the kind of thing you sacrifice to get it, is in effect your own values, and your own happiness and your own self. And so when people think about the idea of self-sacrifice, what they usually think of are Christian martyrs or communist soldiers throwing themselves on grenade for the sake of the revolution. And I think those are cases of self-sacrifice. But there's more realistic and more common forms of self-sacrifice, where the way you're sacrificing yourself is not by just throwing away your physical life, but by throwing away, in effect, your soul. And it's a lot easier to get people to agree to that kind of self-sacrifice. I think when the intellectual leaders who regard sacrifice as noble preach that it's noble, that's more often the kind of thing they're trying to get you to do rather than throw yourself on a grenade. Because especially that way, they can get you to give up not just yourself and your values, but your mind and your judgment. And that way they can manipulate it. I mean, that's what you're doing anyway when you're saying there's this idea that sacrifice is noble and I have to obey that ideal. So, Tristan, what's the best way to tell the difference between a case of genuine sacrifice of the kind that we've just looked at and the alternative category, which is, we're saying, is investment for the sake of returns?
So what, to your point, or to your question, how do we explain the kind of difference between that kind of case and the case that we acknowledge is clearly different, about someone who sacrifices their career choice for the sake of their parents' expectations? Well, you have to think about your value hierarchy. And what I mean by value hierarchy is where you place the relative importance of different values. What a sacrifice is, or what giving up in the case of sacrificing your career choice for the sake of your parents, we have to think about the value hierarchy to understand how and why that's a sacrifice. So, for example, it's totally rational that you would place some value on your the approval of your parents. But the value of a meaningful career, of a fulfilling career, is a much greater value. It's a much deeper value. And so if you're trading off the value of personal fulfillment in your work for the approval of your parents, what you're essentially doing now in your value hierarchy is you're giving up a higher value for a lower value. In the case of, to go back to the medical school example, suppose you could spend time partying with your friends instead of studying. That could be a value. That could be even a rational value, to want to spend your free time with your friends. But it's not a rational value if what it would come at the cost of is doing well in your exams, and that you value doing well in your exams more than that extra time spent partying with your friends. If you did that, it would be, again, giving up a higher value for a lower value. If you choose to forego going to parties while you're in medical school in order to be a better student because your career is so important to you, you're giving up a lower value, the partying, for a higher value, for the deeper value of success in your career, for the thing that matters more to you. So, and all investments involve giving up lower values for higher values, right? And I think it's useful here to think that any time that you could spend spend doing things, there are of course numerous valuable things that you could be doing with your time. The question is, in your hierarchy of values, you have to think about what's most important to you. And in a rational life, the people that pursue ambitious careers, they give up the things that are of lower value in their time to spend their time wisely, spend it doing the things that are going to lead to fulfilling their more important goals. Sacrifice demands that you do the opposite of that, right? So again, if you have a commitment to, or you value a career as an artist, and your parents demand that you give that up to pursue a career that they take as more respectable, they're essentially demanding that you give up that higher value of fulfillment for the lower value of your parents' approval. And that's really what's needed to make sense of sacrifices. You need to think about what is the relative importance of these? Because as we said before, right, every value pursuit, certainly ambitious goals and values have costs associated. The question is the cost that you're paying resulting in you giving up a higher value for a lower value, or is it a lower value for a higher one? And that's what makes the crucial difference.
So just to dig a little further into this idea of a value hierarchy, of the idea that you rank values, or at least you ought to rank values, and then you judge what's a sacrifice versus what's an investment by reference to where is the value in the hierarchy. Is it surrendering a higher for a lower, or vice versa? Why do we even need to have such a hierarchy? Why is it so important to have a ranking of values? Why can't we in effect just be egalitarian and like, these are all values, and as long as we've got some, that's fine. Doesn't matter that there's no reason to. What's the imperative for ranking them in this view?
Yeah, and once again, so what I just said before, this is Ayn Rand's reframing of the concept of sacrifice, the reconceptualization of it that clarifies this, the idea that you need a value hierarchy, and that she defines the sacrifice as giving up a higher value for a lower value or a non-value. In the similar places, she points out the reason that you need a value hierarchy is you are a certain kind of organism, you're a certain kind of being, you're a human being. And if you're going to live on Earth and you're going to succeed on Earth, there are certain requirements for what you're going to do. Let's just take LeBron James again. He has a certain amount of time and energy. Being a successful basketball player will require him to put a lot of that time and energy into developing certain skills, into training, and so on. If he just were to say, well, yeah, I want to be a basketball player, and I want to have time with my family too, he's just not going to have the same kind of success at it. And if those things are not in fact of equal importance to him, again, that's going to be a kind of betrayal to treat them all as if they were on the same level. So the limitation of time and effort that you have, literally just the time that you have in your life, right? You have a limited amount of time in your life. For an athlete, it's even more dramatic, because you have an athletic prime in which you need to, maximize a certain window. You have to prioritize things. You have to rank things. You have to say, this is what's important to me now. This is how much energy I can put into this now. And to put everything on the same level is to ignore the kind of costs associated with it, and to ignore the limitations on time that you have. If you didn't have a limitation on time, of course you could do whatever you want. You could go to medical school and you could still party as much as you want and so on. But that's not reality. Reality is, you have a certain amount of time, a certain amount of energy. And so you have to rank things. Otherwise, you're going to fail at pursuing the things that are most important to you. And certainly the more ambitious you are, the more you have to be disciplined about ranking your values and not treating everything equally. And I want to say one more point on this is uh something's being very difficult. This is part of the point that we made about LeBron, is that it's a big cost, right? That's part of the emphasis that he's making in that interview. But something's being very difficult, clear, or requiring significant endurance, clearly doesn't show by itself that it's a sacrifice, right? To put it in our terms. So I think the way we put the point about value hierarchy makes that clear, but it's worth emphasizing that sometimes even the value that's lower compared to the higher value might still be a very big value, right? Lower doesn't mean like that it's low in some absolute terms. It might mean that, he would absolutely love to spend a lot more time with his family, but it's still not as high of a value as his career. And so you can't infer from the fact that there's a large cost associated, that it's a sacrifice. And the reverse is also true. Uh, let's suppose you have a medical school student who does spend a lot of time partying, and he seems to have a ton of fun doing it, and he does worse on his exams. That doesn't show that it's not a sacrifice, that he's enjoying himself and having fun doing that. Um, the you know the fact that there is some value being received there. First of all, you might think that that's not a genuine value, but even if there is the genuine value in the partying activity and spending time with his friends, uh, that doesn't by itself show that what that person is doing is not a sacrifice, because he might actually be giving up a higher value for a lower one. And I think the concept of a value hierarchy is crucial to illustrate all of those different kinds of points. And to your point or question, Ben, it illustrates why we need to rank values.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about how the need to rank values is in a way just a reflection of your reality as a living thing. One way to see that is just to think about, well, there's a hierarchy in the value of the different parts of our body. Like, you can afford to lose some extra weight very easily. You can afford to lose some skin cells. If you lose a finger, that is losing something of greater value than either of those. If you lose your heart or your brain, that's the end of the story. So just like there's a hierarchy in the importance of, in effect, the value of our physical body parts, there's also a similar point to be made about the more intangible things that are still part of our life. We need to think about how they are ranked, and sometimes there's options, but the options are always going to be within a broader framework where there's a necessity of some kind of ranking. And maybe that will help answer the next question I have for you, Tristan, because if we return to one of those examples of the things that you said were really sacrifices, I imagine part of what somebody might object to, say, for example, the person who gives up a career doing something artistic that they really love because, let's say, their parents just don't think it's a respectable career. They would rather they do something that will make them a lot of money or something that will be more respectable. Why can't I say, if I am the person who gives up the career as a painter to earn the respect of my parents, that it's not a sacrifice because I just happen to value my parents' approval more than my happiness in my career, and I think that's always more important. And then it's not a sacrifice. How would you respond to that kind of analysis?
Yeah, so you might think that from the way I've put it in terms of value hierarchy, that it's just, well, okay, it just depends on how you order things. It just depends on how you choose to do it. And that might give you a sense that it's a sort of subjective issue, that it's just, well, whatever you choose or whatever you prefer in terms of how you order your values, as long as you order it in the right way, then in the kinds of examples that I was giving, then it might not actually be a sacrifice. Yeah, so what if you value your parents' approval more than your career? The uh, the limitations we have, though, and the answer to this kind of question is that the limitations are not just in terms of our time. So I mentioned the time point as the kind of clearest, most dramatic example of the way in which we're limited in choosing our values and that we have to rank them. The other limitation is that we're a certain kind of organism, uh, and we operate according to certain ways. What I mean by that specifically is that we need to live life according to our own rational judgment. The only way we can achieve anything of value, the only way we can appreciate anything of value is through the use of our independent judgment, our independent rational judgment. That means that what you fundamentally believe, what you know, what you understand about yourself, about how you're relating to other people, about the career that you're choosing, especially that as so central of a value that it is. Not only is it just central because people make it central, but it's central because it needs to be central because we're the kind of beings that we need to produce things to survive, right? Your career has to be central to your life as a being that, needs to build things or trade things or create things in order to live. And if you're sacrificing your judgment of that, about that, your first-handed independent judgment of this is the thing that's going to be meaningful to me, this is the thing that's fulfilling to me. And again, we're presuming that it's a rational judgment that you really could pursue a career in an art, like you could be a painter. Let's suppose that you're good at it, and you could make a career in it. Um, it's not rational to simply say, well, maybe I just value my parental approval just more than my independent judgment. There's uh, there are certain non-optional value constraints here. The judgment of your mind is not something that you can just trade off. I think a helpful analogy to think about this is if we just think about physical health, and you know, if you were to say to me, well, I value shooting up heroin more than I value um, my you know ability to sleep well and to not randomly die and to think clearly and to like maintain a steady job. I would tell you that's not optional. That's not a rational value. That's so utterly self-destructive to your physical health that you're undermining all of your other values. The same essential point is true about your judgment, even more so, that all of the things that you value have to come from your rational judgment. And if you're undermining that, if you're sacrificing that, if you're trading that off, if you're saying, well, the thing that I've judged to be correct, to be true, that I understand, if that doesn't matter, I'm going to pursue this other thing instead, in this case, parental approval. You're actually trading off your capacity to value at all. And that is just an irrational approach to value. So they're non-optional things from the perspective of if you're going to live a rational life. The other examples that we brought up are similar. The example of you're choosing a career for a certain kind of status. It's like now the judgment that you're sacrificing is for the sake of approval in the eyes of others, maybe not your parents now. And it's totally consistent with making this point that I'm making, that it's rational to value parental approval within a certain context, or it's rational to value social esteem, but it has to be second to your own first-handed judgment. If what your parents are saying is, we don't care about your personal judgment, we want you to do what we expect, and you go along with that, that is a genuine sacrifice of your rational judgment. And that's what isn't, from the perspective of rationality, is not optional.
I think this goes back to the point that if it's true that sacrifice is necessary for success, it's only true if you're talking about success in the eyes of others. But then what you've just said, I think, Tristan, helps underscore the point that that's definitely not the kind of success that matters or counts. If it's only quote-unquote success in the eyes of others. Well, the point of stressing eyes of others is that in their opinion. But as you're pointing out, their opinion could be wrong, and people too often assume it couldn't be as you put it, sacrificing your own judgment for the sake of theirs. I mean, if your parents thought it would be respectable for you to just take heroin all day and destroy your mind, most people would say they're probably wrong. And so, just as your example of, if you think that taking heroin all day is better than pursuing a productive career, you could be wrong. They could be wrong too. So why worship them? That would be sacrificing your judgment. Now, a few moments ago, Tristan, you said that the key definition that explains the difference between sacrifice, real sacrifice, and investment for the sake of success is this one that you mentioned from Rand of giving up a higher value for a lower value or a non-value. But someone hearing that might think it's odd, because if you look up the definition of sacrifice in just a regular dictionary, you see, in effect, the reverse. And I looked it up on Google. Here's their definition of sacrifice: an act of giving up something valued for the sake of something else regarded as more important or worthy. That sounds like the opposite of her definition. So is Ayn Rand just arbitrarily redefining sacrifice to make it true that investment isn't sacrifice, or is there something wrong with this conventional definition?
Yeah, it's, and you see that definition everywhere. It's not like LeBron is saying, oh, what I mean by this is I'm giving up a higher value for a non-value. As we pointed out, that's not the same. So what's going on? Well, I mentioned before that the LeBron James case, what's happening is, and what's making it plausible for people to think of it as a sacrifice, and then again in this conventional definition, it's about paying a big cost, and in particular, there's a stress on the payoff, or the reward is somehow non-material. And I think that's a key point, because as you pointed out, people don't think of business transactions as a sacrifice. If you're paying a straightforward cost and you're making an investment in a company, you're Warren Buffett making an investment in a certain company, and then you 10x your investment. No one would think of that as a sacrifice. So from Rand's perspective, this is what she calls a package deal. We're packaging two different things together under one concept that are fundamentally different. We talked about cases of investment, like the investment example I just gave, the investment example of LeBron, the investment of a medical school student putting in time and discipline and effort into their career, with real sacrifice, with really giving up your life to a sacrificial cause, like the communist revolutionaries that you gave an example of, or the more mundane versions of you're sacrificing your career choice for the sake of your parents, or for the sake of social approval. And it's a conceptual error, and from Rand's perspective, a conceptual fallacy to package these together. From Rand's perspective, and I think she's right, is that it makes behavior that's self-destructive look respectable and look rational, even by comparison with or by grouping it with things that are real investments. So for example, someone who's using the concept of sacrifice in the conventional way might think, well, look, look at someone like LeBron James. He had to sacrifice time with his family to achieve a great career. that's something we all have to do if we want to be really ambitious. It just turns out that the kind of sacrifice I need to make is, well, I really wanted to be, again, I really wanted to be a painter, and my parents need me to be a lawyer. That's really what they expect of me. And that's just the sacrifice I'm going to have to make to have a successful life and a successful career. If you think about it that way, if you package those things together, it's going to make that look more respectable and rational than it really is, versus if you were to point out, no, one of those things is actually destructive and is a net loss. One of those things is not a net loss. From Rand's perspective, sacrifice is never justified. There's never a reason to give up a higher value for the sake of a lower value or for the sake of a non-value.
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about the notion of sacrifice in the idea that success requires sacrifice as a package deal. And you definitely see the way that package deal works in that definition that I quoted earlier, that conventional definition. Because a package deal takes two things that are fundamentally different, but assimilates them to each other because of some superficial similarity. And you see what the superficial similarity is in that definition. Sacrifice is an act of giving up something valued for the sake of something else, regarded as more important or worthy. Well, what do we mean by more important or worthy there? It's equivocal. And so there's a similarity in equivocal language. It could mean more important to you because of the way that it profits you, like the LeBron James example. And so if that's your definition of sacrifice, it makes sense to think of what he's doing as a sacrifice, because it's actually more important to LeBron to make more money and to become successful and to make money by playing a game you love. The trouble is that what people often mean by more important, giving up something for the sake of something else, regarded as more important or worthy, is they don't mean more important to you. They mean something else, like more important intrinsically, or more important to your parents, or more important to God, or more important to from the perspective of eternity. But these are meaningless, mystical concepts of important. There's no such thing as important to nobody, in effect, if these are non-existent supernatural mystical entities. So when you're doing what people regard as sacrificing for the more important to eternity perspective, you're really not doing it for anything of value to you or to anyone who is important to you. That really then in the end just means a loss. And that's why I think it's important you bring in the way that non-material value works here, because these mystical ideas of value, important to God or important to the universe, well, those are non-material too.
What's relevant here is that it's mystical in the sense of it's something totally irrelevant to your judgment. Your judgment is irrelevant. Your knowledge is irrelevant. Your understanding is irrelevant, and it's just a demand that you serve this more important thing, that you set aside what's important to you for the sake of that thing. And of course, God is one of the most clear examples in terms of its mystical nature.
Yeah, I agree with that. So why, even though there's this deep conceptual confusion involved in this package deal concept of sacrifice, they're selling you a package deal, why are people buying it? Why does it still seem appealing to them? Why does someone like LeBron James even, who's obviously been very rational in the pursuit of his career, otherwise he wouldn't be successful as he is. Why does this something he wants to try to sell himself and explain his success in terms of it, do you think?
Yeah. So, I brought up before how there's a major cost involved, and that's part of what makes it plausible. But it's not the only thing that makes it plausible that people think of this as a sacrifice, or that people are taken in by this package deal. It's that it's really the emphasis on the cost and the non-emphasis on the reward. So let's suppose that instead in that interview where LeBron made that comment about needing to sacrifice time with his family, that he had said, um, yeah, my career has just been a series of rewards. You know, I've put in this time training, but I enjoyed doing it, and then I get paid so much money, and yeah, I didn't get to spend as much time with my family, but that's okay because I value my time playing basketball at a high level more than that extra time I would have spent with my family. So it's not a loss. It's no problem. It's all great, and I get paid enormously doing this. If he were to say that, people would re- respond negatively to that. People would regard that as, oh, he's so selfish and egoistic. How can he say something like that? You know, it's so it's distasteful. You know, to put things in those terms, but it's what's actually happening, right? So, what's a different way to frame that? Well, a different way to frame that is you can emphasize the cost, you can emphasize the pain, the suffering, the loss of time with your family, and that gives it a framing that suggests that there's an altruistic motive, that what you're, and by altruism I mean here that you're giving up values for the sake of others, for the sake of fans, you know, for the sake of the broader community, and to help other people, or to do a service for others, or maybe even his family itself, right? He's making this money so that his family can enjoy it. And if you frame it in that altruistic way, then it, for people who accept altruism, who accept the idea that what morality requires you to do is to sacrifice values for others, to give up values for others, and that's what morality is about, that's going to give it a moral framing now. Now it can be seen as, no, that's noble, that's morally worthy, it's honorable that he's doing that.
And just to clarify, when you say it could be an altruistic motive, I mean, I suppose it's possible that someone like LeBron James has altruistic premises that make him feel guilty for his success, and therefore has to think of it in his own terms for his own sake as, oh, it's actually a sacrifice. That's possible. I suspect what's more likely happening is not so much that he has this deeply entrenched altruistic premise, but that he knows other people do, and that he wants to appease it, that he doesn't want to look evil in their eyes, in spite of implicitly being egoistic, and I think rightfully so, in his own mind.
Yeah.
I think that's a very common, that kind of appeasement of altruistic sensibilities is a very common reason why people go in for this idea of success requires sacrifice. One other point it's worth adding on that builds on some of the things that you've already mentioned, Tristan, because we've talked about some of the examples of real sacrifice, the most realistic of them being the people who decide to sacrifice their own career, their own happiness, their own values for the sake of the approval of other people, and whether they're parents or their peers or what have you. And here it's worth emphasizing that they'll find the idea that success requires sacrifice appealing, just because to think that there's something repulsive about sacrifice that separates it from real investment. You'd have to have a clear sense of the difference between the two. To have that, as you've stressed, you need to have this value hierarchy. You need to have a real personal sense that certain things are much more important to you than others, and that it makes a difference if you're giving up something higher in your hierarchy for something lower in your hierarchy. The thing is that not everybody has that. Not everybody has clearly defined and formed values such that they know how they're ranked with respect to each other. And so, in effect, many people can be egalitarians about their values. And then they can't tell the difference between sacrifice and investment for just the reason that you've explained. And I think this is actually the kind of thing that Ayn Rand was talking about in her essay, Selfishness Without a Self. And I'll just read a short passage from that essay. She says, The cause of altruism's perpetuation into civilized eras is not physical but psychoepistemological. The men of self-arrested perceptual mentality are unable to survive without tribal leadership and protection against reality. The doctrine of self-sacrifice does not offend them. They have no sense of self or of personal value. They do not know what it is that they are asked to sacrifice. They have no first-hand inkling of such things as intellectual integrity, love of truth, personally chosen values, or passionate dedication to an idea. Yeah, if you don't have those things, then the difference between a sacrifice and investment is just not going to be salient to you, and so you'll go in for this idea, oh yeah, success requires sacrifice. Well, Tristan, let's wrap up then. We opened with the question, is sacrifice necessary for success? I think our audience knows what your answer is right now, but how would you wrap up your answer?
So it doesn't lead to success in the sense that's relevant here. We put it earlier as there are two senses in which you can profit something materially and spiritually. In the end, it's your happiness is what matters. So obviously, if you could make more money doing something, but it requires a sacrifice of your personal judgment, that's not success. That's not happiness. That's not fulfillment. Is sacrifice necessary for success in that sense? No, and it leads to the opposite. It leads to undermining your own happiness. From Rand's perspective, and I think she's right about this, also that the right way to think about it is that sacrifice is a violation of your integrity. What a rational life requires is that you stay true to your deepest values, and that means staying true to your value hierarchy, staying true to where things rank in your value. Don't pretend like your parents' approval is worth more than your fulfillment in your career. And in the end, I didn't bring this up when we asked about it, but if you did try to do that, if you tried to invert your hierarchy, it cannot lead to success. Suppose that you were to try to value your parents' approval. What will happen then is, okay, you'll spend time thinking about the career you could have achieved. You're going to experience resentment, which will impact your relationship with your parents because now you're not living the life that you could have lived. You might be more motivated to sacrifice your judgment in other cases too, in other cases that would be self-destructive. If you're giving into the approval of your parents, why not give into the approval of your friends, even if you disagree with their judgment? Why not give into the approval of your romantic partner or your boss, even if you don't agree with their judgment? So it undermines your self-esteem. It undermines your belief that your judgment and your values and your happiness matter, because if you sacrifice them, what you're in effect telling to yourself is your deepest values, your happiness, your judgment are not that important. They're not as important as this other consideration for which you're sacrificing. And in the end, you can't enjoy life to the fullest in that way. You can't have what Rand calls non-contradictory joy, the joy of knowing that you're not pursuing destructive courses of action, that the things that you're doing are benefiting you, are enhancing your life, or causing you to flourish. In the LeBron case, it would be a total sacrifice for him to give up on, spend less time training and spend more time with his family at the cost to his basketball career. And it would not have led to this. If he had done that, it wouldn't have led to his success. It would have led to self-destruction if we take it consistently. And really, I think the summary here is just, it's not necessary for success. And in a rational life, you are never called upon to sacrifice. It's never rational to sacrifice.
I think the stronger statement to make is not just that it's not necessary for success. It's that sacrifice is incompatible with success. and it's something you have to actively guard against if you're passionately committed to your success. And just as my closing thought, we've been talking about Ayn Rand's ideas about success versus sacrifice in today's episode, talking about it mostly from the perspective of her kind of nonfiction abstract philosophy. But if you want to see it dramatized in fictional form, pick up The Fountainhead or pick up Atlas Shrugged, where you see characters like Howard Roark in The Fountainhead who are passionately committed to success and therefore are passionately on guard against any demand that they sacrifice because they know it counts as a compromise of the values they are trying to successfully achieve in their life. So we'll wrap up with some resources for readers. Reading Ayn Rand's novels, Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, is definitely one good place to look. But two other places that we've been drawing on today in talking about Ayn Rand's ideas about what the definition of sacrifice is include her essay, The Ethics of Emergencies. You wouldn't know from that title why this is a place to look, but in fact, that's one of the most important places where she talks about the concept of sacrifice and how it relates to this issue of value hierarchy that we've been talking about. And you can see some of the other passages from her work on this topic if you go to the entry in the Ayn Rand lexicon on sacrifice. And we'll put links to all of these in the show notes. Otherwise, if you liked what we discussed today, please be sure to subscribe, comment, share the episode on YouTube, Facebook, only, of course, if it is not a sacrifice, and send us an email to newideal@aynrand.org if you have questions or thoughts for future episodes. Thanks for having this discussion with me today, Tristan.
Thanks, Ben.